it to the prologue of the Autonom Salon, of the 4th edition of the Autonom Salon. So I'm really excited and very happy to welcome under us, especially the artists whose works you will see in the following 3 weeks, performances, installations, video works, and to welcome our incredible 33 thinkers, writers, performers from all over the world who came together for the Young Curators Academy. I'm very thankful that this is the first edition of an Autonom Salon where we don't do just the regular discourse program that we are used in theater, so to have the public talks after works, but that we go really deep into sharing, into each one teach one, and to do that under national and international. I'm very thankful that this happened through, of course, the funding on one hand, I will mention that, but especially through colleagues who inspired us. So Kang Seng is here. He invited me to Singapore last January. That was the beginning of the Young Curators Academy here. Thanks also to the hosts Erdan Kosova and Irina Shodruch, who made this Young Curators Academy possible. This prologue is the start of the conference on one hand and the Young Curators Academy on the other hand, who started already to come together this afternoon. I really suggest to all of you to go for the marathon lecture performances that start tomorrow and will follow 3 days long. All these 33 persons whom I would like to let this house, the programming, etc., because when I see what they are doing in their local and translocal contexts, I just full of respect and love, and it empowers me very much to have you here. You are like the heart piece of the Autonom Salon. And I would like also to thank those one who made possible this conference. So first of all, of course, it starts always with the money. So Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, our how does it call? How do you translate it to English? Said Thomas Krüger. Thanks to Thomas Krüger, and thanks to the incredible colleagues from academia. So I am just the initiator of this Autonom Salon, and I had the luck in the last decade to be more an object of academia. And that's why I'm related to them. I'm so happy that Bilgin Ayata, who inspired us to our title for the Autonom Salon, we didn't call it De-heimatize Belonging, how the conference is called, but De-heimatize It, focusing on the political discourse that we face in Germany. We will talk about that, especially Bilgin will talk, but we have also other hosts. So Naika Foroutan leading the now again English Berliner Institut für Integrationsforschung, Berlin's Institute for Research of Migration. She's really like the progressive person fighting for us since Sarrazin came up and brought up biologic thesis about people and their brains and possibilities and capacities. So, but I don't want to go to details. So beside those 2 colleagues, we have Julia Roth, who is one of our hosts under us here from Bielefeld University. We have Gabriele Dietze from Humboldt University, who is also here, one of my feminist pioneers. So we have also as host Emilia Roig. She excuses as long as she's a little sick tonight, and she will be ready for tomorrow for all of you. The Center for Intersectional Justice that Emilia is running here. She will host also this event. And of course, from Humboldt University, also your colleagues, Manuela Boyajev, Damien Glochet, are with us. And last but not least, you know, as an artistic director in a house like that, you can initiate things, you can bring people together, but the most important is that you have the next generation and the more intelligent, more educated colleagues who bring it to life, who bring it to practice, and who have more academia behind them than I do. So most of all, I want to thank to Rebecca Einwohner from Maxim Gorki Theater, who is organizing this conference and offering the space to others, and to all my colleagues who made light that we are seenable, who have worked for techniques that we are hearable. I think that's it. Let us de-heimatize it. We will have speeches of not only our funder for the conference, the Federal Agency for Political Education, but civil education, sorry, but also for political beauty, let's say like that. So, but also our funders for Autonom Salon. So our culture senator will pass over for the artist dinner that our artists will take part in. And from Allianz Kulturstiftung, Esra Küçük is with us, supporting the Young Curators Academy, especially. You will meet her. So thanks to everybody who made this possible, through coming, through supporting, through thinking, through loving, through exciting us and empowering us. I'm just happy. Thank you. And Rebecca, it's your turn.
Thank you, Shaman. Dear gathered guests, after the supposed end of the grand narrative of the 20th century, myths of national unity, traditional gender roles, and natural hierarchies are reappearing. The concept Heimat, homeland, is in itself an amalgamation of systems of power like patriarchy, racism, and capitalism. In current debates, it is presented as having recovered from its entanglement in Germany's history of violence. But not only in Berlin, where currently a Heimat ministry is being established, it becomes apparent that seeking refuge in a national enclave serves as a vision for salvation. Successes of Trump, Bolsonaro, Putin, and Erdogan also show a clear global tendency. Welcome to the De-heimatize Belonging Conference. As a discursive intervention of the 4th Berliner Herbstsalon, the De-heimatize Belonging Conference will take place in the following 2 days at Humboldt University of Berlin and Maxim Gorki Theater. On the basis of current debates about Heimat and identity, representatives of the Berlin Institute for Integration and Migration Research, Humboldt University of Berlin, the Center for Intersectional Justice, and their guests open up an intersectional perspective on the connections between colonialism, racism, sexism, capitalism, and Heimat. By transcending gender studies, digital technologies, and activism, they will explicate the concept of de-heimatize belonging as it will be formulated by Professor Bilgin Ayata today. Professor Bilgin Ayata will open the conference with the keynote on de-heimatize belonging. She will elucidate the historical and contemporary notions of the once again fashionable term. With its affective notion, the term Heimat was significant for the justification of Germany's colonial and racist history of violence. Today, it is also related to current border politics and the exclusion of the dispossessed and disenfranchised. The keynote will be followed by a discussion with Professor Naika Foroutan. And tomorrow, on our first conference day at Humboldt University, Professor Ayata will host the panel on de-heimatization in historical and contemporary perspectives. Subsequently, the panel discussion Algorithms of Belonging, hosted by Manuela Boyajev, will investigate how digital technologies transform localization and contribute to the formation of new ideas of identity and belonging. After that, Professor Julia Roth and Professor Gabriele Dietze will analyze the connections between Heimat, right-wing populism, and gender, and discuss creative reconciliations for Heimat. Afterwards, we invite you all to the big opening of the Hapsalon Festival here at Gorky. On Sunday, we will gather at Gorky's big stage where Dr. Emilia Roig and her guests can pose the question, what does it mean in action? In the epilogue, 2 lecture performances will close the conference by expanding the conceptual framework. Professor Gina Athena Ulyssi and Michelle Higgins will give a prospect on the centrality of spirituality for political action. How do we keep hope and resilience in activist contexts to gather ourselves in new structures of planetary networking? And now, let the discursive intervention begin with its prologue. Please let me introduce to you Bilgin Ayata, professor of political sociology at the University of Basel, Switzerland, and Mercator Fellow at Free University of Berlin. She obtained a PhD in political science at Johns Hopkins University and is currently working in 2 research projects exploring the concept of affective citizenship. In another research project, she investigates the EU's migration management in the Mediterranean. Ayata has worked extensively on socio-political transformation processes with a focus on migration as well as protest movements, transnationalism, and memory. In addition to her research and teaching activities, she has been a curator and organizer of political and decolonial interventions. After the keynote, Professor Naika Foroutan will discuss the concept of de-heimatize belonging with Professor Ayata. Professor Naika Foroutan is the founding director of the German Center for Integration and Migration Studies, professor of Integration Studies and Social Science at the Humboldt University of Berlin, and director of the Berlin Institute for Empirical Integration and Migration Studies. Naika Foroutan is the head of research groups such as United or Heimat. With her expertise in post-migration and societal transformation, she has intervened into the German public discourse. Professor Foroutan has worked extensively on theories of hybridization and on the question how marginalized groups can participate and be integrated into society. She founded the Junge Islam Konferenz and has been active in both research but also discursive practices to defy depictions of Muslims and Islam in Europe. Please welcome Bilgin Ayata. Thank you.
Does it work? Yeah. Thank you so much, dear Rebecca, for this very kind introduction, and thank you, dear Sharmin, also for your wonderful words. I thought there was a lot of professor and doctor when theater people are introducing us, right? We're actually envying you, you know, it's not, you know, I mean, it's always like that. From academia, you look over to the artists, and the artists look back to us, but let's just de-professorize also the rest, yeah? Okay. So, thank you very, very much, really, very much, Sharmin and the whole team, Rebecca, Kubra, and the entire Gorky team for the invitation and very much for the cooperation that we had over the past year. Also, of course, thank you so much, dear Naika, the team of the Humboldt University, and everyone else who has been very passionately and dedicatedly making this Hapsalon happening. It's of course very exciting and also a little uncanny that this call for de-heimatization has resonated to such a degree and has been taken up and is being now further developed and explored in so many impressive ways, which you can see in this fantastic program of the Hapsalon. So thank you really to all the artists, curators who have put their passion and labor to come here and share their works. I'm particularly excited about exactly this encounter of so many artists, activists, and academics from all over the world to share their energy and vision in this collaborative effort, which I think is very much driven by the desire to put a halt on the rise of this uninhibited exhibition of racism, nationalism, and aspiring fascism that we are witnessing on so many different places in the world currently. So in the next few minutes, I would like to present to you what I mean by this call for de-heimatization And that means that I have to go back a little bit and look at the history of the term, look at a little bit at the meaning of the German term Heimat, and how it was politically employed at various historical moments. And then I would like to come back to our present times and look at the contemporary political usage and functions of implying Heimat politics or homeland politics in order then to suggest alternative avenues, how we can engage with concepts of belonging that are not racializing and excluding as it is with the term Heimat. So, clearly, as you can see in the term itself, rather than pluralizing it, the call for me is to dismiss it altogether. But first, let me start actually with a confession. So my initial intervention into the Heimat discussions happened last year during a conference at the Gallery Savvy, which that intervention emerged out of a frustration a little bit that not only conservatives and the right wing do not get tired to put the term Heimat in front of us, but there's also a certain attractiveness, it seems, that, whenever the topic is dropped into the public, everybody very readily joins the discussion, no matter from, where one stands. Everyone has a story to tell, to object, or to protect the term or to reject it. So it's a very ready discussion that is always happening there. Ever since I can think back in my own political history and memory, I remember discussions about if it is possible to have two homelands, two Heimats, if one can have the same emotional attachments to a homeland, if one has actually migrated, or why particular groups are excluded from the emotional community of Heimat, even though they're citizens, etc., etc., etc. I myself have passionately contributed to these debates in the 1990s, where I highlighted very often and very passionately my rightful belonging to Germany, and that I am as entitled as any other white German to this very notion of Heimat, where I was born into as a descendant of migrants. It was a political goal for me back then to change the boundaries of Heimat so that it was able to accommodate and include me and others who are racialized in these discussions and excluded, so that everyone can claim this term Heimat, right, in Germany. But today, 20 years later, I no longer have any interest in making the term Heimat more democratic, more inclusive, or more plural. Quite the contrary, I want to propose that today there's no point in pluralizing, gendering, queering the concept of Heimat for the sake of disarming the populists or the right wing from their favorite Kampfbegriff, thus rescuing it for a greater good. There is no greater good in this term, period. Instead, I want to suggest that we de-heimatize belonging in our political debates, which means that we, rather than engaging in the discussion of how to make it plural, we should dig deeper and unfold the power relations that make this term so powerful over and over again. So just to state it right away, I'm not refuting the importance of thinking about and debating belonging, of course, or the importance of feeling at home, or thinking about the home and its affective bonds. But the term Heimat is not a neutral or static description, an ahistorical description of an emotional attachment to a particular place. It does have a political history and a context that is marked by violence, racialization, and power relations, which is what we should much stronger divert our attention to, instead of keep talking over and over again how to, make the boundaries of Heimat larger. Now, let's begin, now that everyone is almost settled in the container. Hi. Yeah. Let us begin first. Let us begin. Now we're beginning. No? Is it because I used this one? Okay. This is like the only slide that is really needed. Anything else is just decorative. So that would be really... It's okay. It's because habe ich da etwas...
Du hast die Präsentation
See, it was my
beendet.
fault, of course. I did something. Yeah.
So hier ist das one.
All right. Next slide. Perfect. Thank you. Na, super. Great. Thank you. Thank you again to this great team at Talkie. I realized that, you know, in theater they're rehearsing and planning a lot. It was a very interesting experience these past months, how often we had to come and check things. So I learned a lot also. Thank you. So let's look at this graph that you're seeing here behind from the Digital Dictionary of the German Language, which records the frequency of use of terms in public scripts per million words. As you can see in this curve of the graph Heimat, which, you know, first I should say, of course, it's always like this tricky thing when you're speaking English about Heimat and say Heimat, right? Of course, one of the specificities, let's say, of the term itself is that there's not a really accurate direct translation into the English, so it's often referred to either as home or as homeland, right? You have also in Spanish or in Italian the reference to patria, right? So let me, just for the sake of highlighting the particular connotation that I'm talking about, I would like to stick to just the term Heimat instead of home or homeland. So as you can see here in this graph, the term Heimat enters the German public realm in the 18th century, but it's only in the 19th century that the term becomes very popular, reaching a peak between 1880 and 1819. Oh, I have also this thing here. But, yeah, you see it there. But it's only, in the 1880s and 1890s, right? The years, of course, for those engaging with colonial policies, you know that the years 1884, 1885 marked the Berlin Africa Congress in Germany, also known as the Congo Conference or Africa Conference, where upon invitation by Otto von Bismarck, imperial powers convened to divide up the African continent. So you see how right around this time we have this, increasing popularity of the term. The use of the term Heimat remains pretty popular throughout the 20th and 21st century, with an increase of its usage since the 2010s, right? That you see it here, it goes slightly up again. In the contemporary usage of the term, Heimat is often conflated with the nation. However, historically, the concept emerged actually in opposition to the nation state, in opposition to the centralization of the state, as well as to the introduction of national standards to social rights. For instance, as it occurred in the reforms of the Heimatrecht in 1871 and 1894. In other words, with these structural transformations that I just mentioned, the local had to give way to the national, and thus Heimat, as an economic and political unit, was no longer a valid parameter, but became replaced by the idea of the nation state. Before industrialization and the birth of the nation state, the term Heimat referred to home, that is a physical property and the place of birth. And etymologically, the term Heimat actually derives or is related to three terms, to Hemd in German, referring to Ham, which is the shirt, to Heim, right, which is the home, but also to Himmel, right, so from him to the sky. So it's like these three, or the heaven, these three etymological roots of the term Heimat in itself. Yet with the change of Heimatrecht laws, the migration from rural to urban areas, and with the building of factories and etc., the meaning of the term Heimat mutated from its earlier rather juridical and political meaning into a realm of memory of a pre-industrial past. Over time, the term came to provide a sense of ontological security in the increasing alienation and individualization of modern life. So basically, we could say when the centralized state emerged with its cold bureaucracy, as is often referred to, Heimat received its new meaning as the affective container of a nostalgia for an enchanted world free of conflicts. Of course, such a world free of conflicts relates to the phantasma of white male property owners, and certainly not to those excluded from such forms of entitlement. Of course, I'm speaking here about women, the enslaved, and the disenfranchised, which Rebecca already beautifully referred to. For a preliminary conclusion now, we can say that the use of Heimat in German history and culture configures itself as the affective bond between the local and the national, or the rural and the urban. But there is also a further quality to the term Heimat that relates more to the personal realm, to the effect on the self when employing Heimat as a political discourse. In his excellent critical theory on Heimat, the linguist Peter Blickle outlines how, in reaction to Enlightenment, German romanticists were opposing the subjugation of the German spirit to the critical autonomous subject, which put the capacity to reflect and critique oneself into the core of subjectivity. So self-awareness, the ability to distance oneself from oneself and to be object and subject at the same time are at the heart of the self-perception of the trajectory of the white male subject, so to say. And as Blickle says, securing one's sense of Heimat was a way for the ego to have a sense of oneself without needing to be aware of it, so that the solitude of the individual into the world became nullified. So in other words, Heimat is a space free of self-critique and conflict. And I want to argue that it is exactly because of this very comforting, feel-good quality that the term Heimat remains so attractive yesterday and also today. Whenever there are critical junctures, critical political developments that challenge the self-understanding and the status quo of society, Heimat reappears in political discourse as a soothing response to critique that promises a safe, secure place of protection from change, to put it simply. I will come back to this point in a second, but first want to address another critical issue when looking at the history of the term Heimat in German political thought and politics. So while there's a very large scholarship, both in literature, German studies, sociology, and history on Heimat, one aspect that has been rather marginalized and neglected is the role of Heimat in German colonialism that I want to look at a little bit. Heimat served not only as the affective bond between the local and national, as I was just saying before, but it equally served as the affective and effective bond between Germany and the colonies. In order to understand this, we need to pay attention both to the importance of the use of Heimat in the domestic realm, but also look at the international dimension of the employment of use of Heimat. So if you look only at the domestic employment and use of this term, Heimat appears to be a static, localized, and rather narrow term that resists change. But if you look and consider its use in the colonial enterprise, actually we see that the term Heimat was in fact quite flexible, adaptable, and a dynamic term that could easily cross borders and seas and could be even employed on territories overseas. For instance, it was possible in German colonial magazines to affectionately describe the Kilimanjaro as the highest of all German mountains, and to systematically extend the notion of Heimat to the German colonies. In this expansion, it is quite interesting to see how nature, one of the very key reference points in the Heimat discourses, the relationship of nature to Heimat became particularly important when the aspect of innocence, right? Everyone has a Heimat, it's a neutral term, it's an innocent term, right? Landscape and nature had a very important role in promoting also this discursive power of Heimat. So interestingly, exactly this role of nature we see also employed when we look at the use in the colonial enterprise. While the colonized subjects were dehumanized, exoticized, and their alterity, their difference emphasized, the depictions of nature in German colonial magazines focused very much on similarities. A study by Jens Jäger, who has examined the images and depictions in both the school books of Kolonialkunde, colonial studies as a subject in school, as well as visual representations in the magazine Colony and Heimat, shows this point rather illustratively. Here you have the highest German mountain, Kilimanjaro, a depiction. This is from the magazine Colony and Heimat. And here, for instance, two images where you can see this very, this notion of similarity, right? This is an image of Ratzeburg von Drei Linden, and here another depiction from the magazine Colony and Heimat, Dar es Salaam, where you can see how this visual similarity has been established there. In order to make the colonial project readable for the German audience, the trope of Heimat was employed as the core affective bond, I want to argue, between the colony and the metropole. It helped to overshadow the violence of colonialism by decorating it with a cozy feel-good term, where you have covers of this magazine of Colony and Heimat, where you see Easter and Christmas being celebrated, and this warm coziness of Heimat is being transferred territorially to the colonized territories, places. So, I want to argue that this cozy, feel-good quality of the term Heimat was able also, or helped to distract from the violence of colonialism. I think in this historic relationship between Heimat and colonialism has very crucial implications also for our present discussions on Heimat. So if Heimat always has not only an internal but also an external dimension, and if this quality of distraction from political violence is also present, is a constitutive part also of the political use of Heimat, then of course it is critical to ask what it is distracting us from today, and what configures today as the external dimension of the revival, let's say, of the Heimat discourse that we are witnessing here since 2010, 11 and onwards. So coming to the use today when trying to understand how these functions of Heimat are in operation today, I would like to address the European migration policies outside of its borders. The contemporary form, I want to argue, of this German and European involvement in Africa is no longer captured by or lived out by conquering territory, but in the acts of securing and fortifying borders. This has led to an ever expansion of the EU frontiers, in effect, on the African continent, as we can see with regard to the migration policies of the EU. The highest increasing budget item of the next EU budget plan for 2021-2027 is the column Migration and Border Control, which will grow to 160%. There are numerous multifold measurements being implemented on the continent itself to establish and survey borders and detect migrant routes and intervene in them. In the meantime, a massive militarization is taking place on the Mediterranean Sea, where the NATO, EU agencies, military vessels of member states, private surveillance companies are all joining efforts in the war against migration that in the EU officially is politely termed as combating irregular migration. So I thought, since we are right now sitting here in a huge container, I remember when Charmin sent me the pictures of the opening about the container, which was a temporary measure, I think, because the main building was being renovated. I was just right at that moment in Lampedusa because I was visiting as part of a research project on the European migration policies after 2015. The refugee camps in Tunisia, Italy, and Greece. And at that right moment, I was in Lampedusa, where we were just seeing these containers in a very different way, of course. So I thought, in order to visualize a little bit also the effects of these migration policies, I just show a few impressions of this field trip that we did to where we were studying the extent and the implication of these migration policies, not only in Greece and Italy, but also their effects on Libya, Tunisia, and Turkey. So because we don't have much time, I just want to address maybe 3 sides and come back with that, how this is related to Heimat. So what you see here is an image from above from Moria camp, which is Europe's largest refugee camp, which was initially built with a capacity of 2,150 persons, but where currently 13,000 human beings are entrapped there. This is an image from September 2019, and you can see that here the main you see the containers that are up on the right corner, which is the initial camp, so to say, and that was built for these 2,000 people, and the rest is what we call an extension in this project, the wider extension of the camps itself. Let's zoom inside a little bit also to see how these lives in these containers are. Here you see an image again from Moria with the people waiting in front of the EASO office where they have to file their asylum claims, which is another separate barbed wire section. So you see the containers are separated from each other with these kind of barbed wires. Here you have the food chain, as it is called. People spend in average about 6 hours a day for the meals, breakfast, lunch, and evening, since, again, as we said, the capacity was for much less people. The situation of this overcrowding is nothing new. It is not related to the summer. In fact, we're arguing in this project that this refusal of infrastructure is intentional. It is not a matter of financial means. It is really a matter of denying access and to very basic services such as water, electricity, medical help, education, etc. This is an image of, this is not an image of Samos, this is still Moria. You see these holes, the very big hole there, which separates the containers from the tents where the actual living is currently happening, where most of the refugees are currently being placed. This was in August 2019, where the resurgence of many more migrants arriving and refugees arriving on the islands happened after Erdogan was in preparation for his invasion that we're seeing right now. He already had stopped the border controls at the western coast of Turkey, and you had per a week about 700 arrivals in Lesbos alone. So this was one of the makeshift tents. And of course, when we say makeshift, it always sounds it's there for a short time, but usually this is not the case. As we have seen in the larger picture, the situation in these camps is like that since 2016, and it's only worsening and not changing. Here we have Samos Island, where currently, the hotspot is placed, the refugee camp, or hotspot as they're called, are situated, which is referred to as the hell, given that this is again a place that was built for 700 people. These containers are for 700 people. Yet, as you can see in this picture, again, the extension of it way into the woods and forests is going very, very far. And the life conditions for people fleeing war, who are injured, traumatized, are met with in situations in conditions like this. This I wanted also to show is Leros, the hotspot in Leros, which is placed right in front of a psychiatry clinic. This is a larger area which was closed for the longest time in Greece because it was a psychiatry clinic where the patients had been treated extremely badly. There was a big scandal in the 80s, towards the end of the 80s, and the clinic had been closed down, but then became reopened, and it is in effect. And right in front of it, there is the other hotspot, the Leros hotspot, which hosts about 2,000 refugees currently, and it is being referred to as the Hilton of the hotspots, of the camps, because people actually live in these containers. There are no tents yet, let's say. So obviously, I don't have the time to tell in detail how devastating and dehumanizing the condition in these camps are. As I said, we went to study the infrastructure of these camps, and what we encountered was, one by one, yet another violation of very fundamental and basic rights after another. At present, there are about 30,000 people living in this condition on the 5 Greek islands. The warfare against migration in the Mediterranean has turned this borderscape, the Mediterranean borderscape, into a zone of abjection, misery, and murder. It was in this context simply, I have to say, repelling, and yeah, that's the only word that comes to my mind, and disgusting, to hear that only a few days later, after our return from this trip, that Ursula von der Leyen, the new designated EU Commissioner President, announced that the resort migration that was there before, there was a commissioner for migration, now shall be renamed into protecting our European way of life. I hope you have read about this. There has been some criticism about this nominating a commissioner for the protection of our European way of life. And one of the rather disturbing aspects of this announcement was that when some of the European parliamentarians were criticizing this, saying that this is a selling out to right-wing populism by renaming the Commissioner of Migration, to migration to protecting our European way of life, as if it is migration that threatens this European way of life, right? The designated president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, wrote an article and tweeted then later that actually the European way of life is, what is meant by that is Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, which guarantees the fundamental basic rights. Now, this kind of reversal, right, exactly, particularly after coming from this this trip into these refugee camps, and after this trip of, say, encountering right there the consequences of European migration policies, is, of course, on the one hand, rather, as I said, disturbing, but also seems to be, for me, a very an aspect that relates to what I said earlier about this soothing, feel-good aspect, right, of Heimat. I mean, protecting our European way of life is basically another term for Heimatschutz in German, the homeland security. Of course, the Homeland Security Department in the US was inaugurated in 2002 after the attacks on September 11. Yet in Europe, this term was still met with some trepidation, right, and with some care and with some hesitance. Now, after, right, when all of these policies have been implemented, the fact that now exactly this resort, this department in the European Commission that is probably at the in most violent ways exactly undermining these fundamental rights, right, is not just a small matter in that regard. For me, this outrageous renaming reminds me very much how the Ministry of Interior in Germany was renamed, or the name of the ministry was expanded in 2018 into a Ministry of Interior, Construction and Heimat, right after, or not right after, but after years, since 2011, after the abyss of institutional racism became revealed in the course of the investigations following the NSU racist murder series. It was during that time when the voices of the racialized communities were getting a little bit of more room in the mainstream discourse, with the demand that German politics and society has to address racism as its core problem. But instead that their demand was met, instead of officially acknowledging the problem of racism, instead a Ministry of Heimat was presented. So you see that these two moves of the two institutionalization of Heimat, right, when the political climate of racism, when the dehumanization of migration, the rise of more and more attacks on synagogues, mosques, refugee camps, activists and politicians in Germany and in Europe at large is happening, that right at this time, the Heimat discourse is infused to us, it seems, almost to soothe and distract us, I want to say. So maybe Marx would have called this opium also, I don't know. But it's really very much seems to me that the more violent the means and strategies actually get to protect our ways of life, which we currently see, that we see in this, terminology also being circulated now. It seems to me that, right, the more violent and uglier these means and strategies get, because of the fear of the fear of the rise of populism, etc., the louder the bells of Heimat are ringing, not just in Germany, but in many other places as well. It is for this reason that the task of pluralizing Heimat can no longer be an option. It can only be to de-heimatize, to claim the spaces, right? This container that the container becomes not the housing of 20 refugees of 8 square meter ISO boxes, but in fact becomes a place where, over 100 artists and academics come together to exactly challenge and investigate what makes this term such an important company from these politics of uninhibited racism that we're witnessing right now. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Bilgin, for your talk. Thank you, Shermin. Thank you, Gorky. Thank you, my colleagues from Humboldt and from the Center for International Justice, from Bielefeld. Thanks to all of you coming here to join our discussion. And I especially thank you for this somehow eye-opening pictures, for comparing this feel-good idea of Heimat to the real moment we are facing in Europe, and to this idea of how we want to protect our values here on the one side, and on the other side we're treating our values every day as if they wouldn't exist or if they never have been existing. So my job description for tonight is mainly to make Bilgin talk more about her concept, and we both would want to invite you to join the discussion, to ask your questions, because we will have more place and space tomorrow at Humboldt University, where the conference will take place, to discuss the concepts, not only through an academic lens, but with all of you. But we don't know if everybody's going to join tomorrow, so if you would join tonight, that would make us happy. Okay, so I would just try to start with you, and then I would just have my eyes over there and see if there is someone who wants to make an intervention, if there is someone who feels challenged, provoked, or released by your idea of de-heimatizing our political realm. But let me just start with one question, so that we have that question out of the audience, because I'm quite sure that you will be asked this question every day or every time you talk about that. And this question goes like, but isn't Heimat a good private feeling? And are we allowed to ask people to leave away their emotional way of talking and belonging? We, from the cosmopolitan academic realm that don't know how real people feel? I'm going to ask you that, because I just want to share a little moment where I have been on the panel a few days ago. It was a panel on East Germany, and it was a panel that was had invited a lot of people that I've never had seen in my life before. Even I'm quite working on that topic. They all came over from Chicago, I don't know why, to know a little bit more about what has happened here 30 years ago. And while those people were talking about that, I was seeing those students looking up in Wikipedia, GDR. What is that? And so we had to talk a little bit on the concept, and then there was one guy in the audience who asked me about it. We were talking about German identity. This was the main idea of the panel. And then one guy asked me, what do you say about German identity? Would you think that with all those Muslims who came to this country will finally lose its identity, and how will this country cope with all those people? And I just tried to answer, and I elaborated an idea, and I just said, well, actually, it seems that you have a very clear idea of what German identity is, but if we go back into history, there has never been such a clear idea, and Germany has always been a moment of invention. And in 1848, when Germany was invented, it started with 39 kingdoms. They all had different cultures, they had different religions, they had different even languages. They were speaking Polish, Russian, French. So Germany has always been a multicultural society. We have to try somehow to rethink this historical past, and so on and so forth. And I thought I was quite intellectual, quite clever, and I thought I would just bring them to rethink Germany in some other ways. And then I had this colleague sitting next to me, and he turned towards me, and then he said, well, that all sounds very good, but actually I would say my father wouldn't think like you.
And so it was this moment of always bringing every analytical concept into an emotional battle. So you think you elaborated something, you talked to us a lot. I mean, you have the good chance that you're talking to an audience that I think will understand, or maybe we'll see over the questions later. But normally we are always confronted with this moment of how do you explain that to the kleiner Mann or to the people in the Rust Belt? So somehow, how do we deal with the idea that Heimat in the private realm is mainly perceived as something positive? People asked to define Heimat would say Heimat is the place where I have lived, or where my family is, or where I have good emotions of security or warmth or feel-goodness. And then you explore very well, and you clearly showed us that Heimat is instrumentalized in the political realm. So how do we deal with the difference of these two dimensions?
Well, in very basic feminist terms, right? The private is political, first of all. That would be a very first question to these two dimensions. But I think you addressed it, very, very hands-on, exactly this notion of the argumentative fallback to the kleiner Mann, right? How are we going to say this to the ordinary man? And I think man is really the man, always in the reference, right? And that seems to me, anyway, the big unease that there is, right? It's, maybe we are in times where the kleine Mann, that man is not anymore in the center of attention. There may be something like that, and this is causing a lot of unease. So that this retraction to this feel-good emotional place is, of course, one way to stop the conversation about what has to change. So if that colleague of yours thought it's a critique that you think differently than his father,
whom he described as a kleiner Mann.
Yes, I mean, I'm just saying, we should, the question is, do we really have to think like our fathers, right? I mean, that is what I meant. I mean, is that really a critique? I mean, I would say, thank you. I hope so. I don't, right? And I think, let's just to make this come back to the basic connotation that you said, this notion of distraction that I was saying, right? It distracts us by once giving comfort, right? But this comfort works, of course, only for those who are part of the suggested Heimat, right? This distraction is also a very disturbing one for those who are, of course, not or seen or deemed not to be part, right? So instead of struggling exactly for the very vital concerns, right? We're kept at bay, I'm saying, right? With this notion of a feel-good term that only applies for those who want to keep also the status quo, right? So this notion of introducing the personal realm is another discursive means in here. And of course, it's everyone can identify and define their ways of belonging as they want. This is not a call about not having positive feelings for a particular homeland or not, but it is about to understand that these feelings are not, they're not natural, they're affectively governed. So in that any debate that you lead on Heimat ends up at the end to become an extremely passionate one. So I think you're right that today probably the audience, it will be maybe a different discussion than in other places that you and I go, where really there are sentences, I mean, I've also heard them, you cannot take our Heimat away. You cannot take the Heimat away from me, right, to a critique of a political usage. It's really interesting what kind of defensive mechanisms comes here at place. And we were talking before about the article for the Tagesspiegel that came up today. There I use the term affective resistance, right? There's an affective resistance to speak about certain things such as racism, right? So instead of speaking, for instance, in Germany, right, to dig deeper into all of these, now documented connections and institutionalized forms of racism, it is, of course, a much safer place to go and speak about Heimatverlust, the loss of Heimat, right? Because everyone, this is also something very attractive of the term. Heimat is, of course, there is not a single definition for it, so it's a little bit of an amorph term that gains meaning very much by our personal ideas about Heimat, right? And so that makes it, Adorno has a beautiful statement on that. I have to say it first in German and I try a bad translation in English. It is es ist ungreifbar und dadurch unangreifbar, right? It is really difficult to grasp it, right? What is really Heimat, right? And exactly this quality makes it also so difficult then to critically intervene in that.
And you already mentioned the newspaper article that you wrote today for the Tagesspiegel, and there you also elaborated on the idea of Heimat being a concept that gives ease, internal ease, a feel-good moment, a moment of peace towards the inside, while at the same time being a violent act towards the outside. And you also compared this on the idea of the right to Heimat and asked somehow whether some people have the right and others not. And there you elaborated on the idea of the German idea of defending the Heimat while at the same time asking Erdogan to somehow get the refugees, the Syrian refugees, out of our Heimat. And at the same time, we look at this military intervention, these war moments, and can't couple them together. It's the idea of our feel-good moment of Heimat and the non-right to Heimat of the Syrian Kurdish people is something you were explicating there very well. Maybe you could elaborate for those who didn't read the article.
Given a second talk. Yeah. I won't do that, but just very briefly, I think, this is a very dear to me, that to say this over and over and over again, that of course we all know, we don't all know, but we can, if we want, follow the war at migration that is happening at the shores. At least since 2015, there's a very big debate, on different levels, right? It can be because of the drowning, over 40,000 people so far that have drowned in the Mediterranean because of not having legal access to arrive safely in Europe. But it can be then also in this discussion of, we have to manage this, because after that, the right-wing populists became even stronger. So if there will be another 2015, which is, now I'm quoting the Minister of Heimat, Horst Seehofer, the German minister, who just a few days before the military intervention of Turkey took start in Syria, he went to Ankara to rescue the EU-Turkey deal. Before he went on the plane, he gave already before a press statement where he said, well, we could have another 2015, another quote-unquote crisis of migration, and no one wants that, right? No one can afford that politically. And I think this is something not just valid for the Heimat minister, but on many other places, even on academic occasions, when I was speaking about critiquing the EU-Turkey refugee deal, there's always a certain silence, because of course everyone knows, first of all, it's an illegal. It's literally this is a cooperation between the EU and Turkey that was announced as a press statement that entails over 6 billion euros of tax money from here probably and elsewhere, right? That is being transferred to Turkey in order to keep the refugees inside the country. And in 2017, the European Court of Justice rejected a claim by 3 refugees who were in Greece, and they were facing deportation to Turkey based on this EU-Turkey refugee deal. And their lawyers went to the European Court of Justice to say that Turkey is not a safe country, and the European Court of Justice should actually, examine that and give an opinion about that. And in the European Court of Justice made this very interesting press release then. It rejected this. It said we cannot actually examine if this is if Turkey is a safe country or not, because actually there is no EU-Turkey refugee deal. They inquired with the Commission, they inquired with various EU agencies, and no one actually concluded an agreement. So the press release of the European Court of Justice says that on the 18th of March, there was a in 2016, when the deal was publicly announced by back then the Prime Minister of Turkey, and in the presence of the still current President of the EU Commission, Juncker, and Donald Tusk. The three of them publicly announced that there is this refugee deal, right? But in fact, there is no EU institution that has officially entered such an agreement. And if anything, then it would be the member states, the head of the member states, who actually have entered such a deal. So now we are 3 years into this, where people are living in really very difficult to describe conditions, both in Greece, I mean, both for the refugees and the people also on the Greek islands, based on a deal that officially does not even exist, and 6 billion euros are being sent to Erdogan, who is of course empowered not only financially, but politically to such a degree that in front of the whole world, he can just invade Syria and say, I'm just going to do a safe zone, which is basically, I'm going to cleanse out here the people who were here before, and I'm just going to put 1 million refugees there without asking them, of course, if they want to go or not. So the statement by Horst Seehofer just before going there is really important, that he said, we cannot have another 2015. Or, there's one in the wings. And I think that this shows us that this deal actually is not a deal of refugee cooperation, but in fact, it's a deal of trading one fascism to another. So it is okay if in Turkey people are detained. It is okay, that Syrians will be relocated, right, forcibly pushed back to Syria, as long as there are not more migrants coming, which then may lead to even more votes for the AfD and other right-wing parties. So what kind of a deal is this really? I think this is the important question that we need to ask, and what kind of a role does here the Heimat minister himself and this general discussion on Heimat have on that? I think this is really a very core point that we need to look at.
But let's connect this invasion in Syria to the description of Heimat, or to the notion of de-heimatizing it. If we transfer our debates from here to the people in Syria, this wouldn't work. Maybe it wouldn't work because you explained that Heimat is something that is very hardly translated into other languages. We were already talking about that, and if we try to see how others would describe Heimat or would translate it, it would be something as homeland or patria, or in Farsi it would be vatan, and this is always somehow located to a place, a nation, or a nation state. And therefore, would this conflict with your idea that on the one side we see people and we would say they have their right to Heimat, or would Heimat not be the right word? So we would say that Turkey and Erdogan, they're invading the Heimat of the Syrians and the Kurdish people, and there we would describe Heimat as a right, while at the same time here we would want to claim for a de-heimatizing moment. Would you think this conflicts?
Yeah, this is a very important question that I hope we will also discuss tomorrow in the panel, particularly in the first panel, where we will also speak to Eren Keskin, a very prominent, defendant also of Kurdish rights and other rights. So this is a very vital question, of course, right? To whom where does this critique apply to, right? And I think this is again the same discussion about the personal and the political, right? When we call here in this conference, now I'm speaking in we, right, taking the power of this whole engagement, right, for intersectional analysis of this term, right? Of course, it speaks very much to the enforcement, right, of the idea of Heimat to perpetuate and export more of these violent policies. That homeland politics is, of course, a prime justification for war is not a new insight, right? I mean, clearly this is, in the name of nation, genocides and wars are being carried out. But I think what I would like to rather, point out to would be what instead of instead of
I understand you.
Everyone does now, yeah? Instead of universal, what's happening? Someone has gotten into me, yeah. Instead of making this more of a universal term that applies everywhere and everything, I think it is very, I would rather say, let's look at the specificities in all of these places and let's learn from them. So I rather would say, hey, let's look at Rojava and look, for instance, right, how this Heimat idea takes shape there, and maybe, what kind of de-heimatization is maybe happening there. Maybe we can learn something also by just looking at these other places. So it's not just about criticizing the invasion, but also looking what it is actually destroying, right? And this invasion is happening in a place where in the middle of really impossibilities, a model of living together and belonging is being developed that is in resistance and in rejection to these notions of Heimat, homeland politics that has been carried out both in Syria and in Turkey and in all of these 4 countries where Kurds have been living after they have been denied statehood, right? And I think this is a very useful source to look at both Palestine and the Kurds and other places, right? What kind of an engagement with Heimat happens there, where justice and freedom and independence are very much at the core, where these become political claims and not emotional feel-good qualities, feel-good components.
Well, thank you very much for pointing out to that and for showing how difficult this debate is, that because when I started with the idea to say we can elaborate on an idea and can always be confronted with people who would say, but this doesn't take hold true for me, or I don't understand you, or I feel different than you do. You also showed that with the idea of Heimat. On the one side, we would state that the Kurdish people, the Palestinian people, would have the right to have a Heimat or a statehood or whatsoever, and then on the other side, we would look maybe more irritated to the Catalan people asking for Heimat, and for others, we would say, shut up with the Heimat idea. So this is also while we talk about religion, we would say, well, religion is opium for the people, and then on the other side, we sit here and defend people to have the right to live their religion, and maybe this is also something that we are capable of, and this is maybe something that makes us so angry when people sit there and say, but you don't talk for my father, because in the end, we're also talking for them, because we all this is an idea that is very much in the discussion now, this idea that those people sitting here, and we are part of a cosmopolitan elite that doesn't understand the problems of today. While this somehow neglects and somehow visualizes that a lot of us come from first-generation immigrant people who have made it to some step, and now that we are sitting there and asking for corrections and critique, we're suddenly put into the place of cosmopolitan people who don't understand the real word of the small people who actually are our fathers too. So this is maybe something that shows how difficult our debates are, and I would want to open this to the audience and ask you for your questions. I know that we have to finish here at 20:30. I don't have the time. Is it already 20:30? We still have 10 minutes. Okay, so please stand up. There's a mic going to be given to you. We don't see you actually very good, but yes, maybe you just say your name and then your question.
Also, I'm Jutta Schwenksbier, and my question is, you say you want to de-heimatize belonging, but I'm missing the concept what should be belonging, the identity for it. Is there anything that you reflect when you take out something, you must add something new? And for me, heimatize is very much connected to the German folk, meaning if you want to have a state, like the Kurdish people, you have to have a folk first, meaning if you want to have a Heimat and a folk, you can have a state, otherwise you don't. So these are very much connected to international law. And that's why the Jews always insist that they are a Jewish folk, although this is a religion and not something connected with ethnicity or other things. So I really don't get your point when you say you want to de-heimatize belonging, what should be the next concept for it, and how this is connected to the statehood, because folk is essential in international law to have a state. And if you don't have Heimat, you don't have folk, what should be the next step? Do you want to abolish all states or all nations, or where do you want to go?
Thank you. Do you want to collect? Yes? Okay. Next over there.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Aziz. I'm in the Young Curators Academy, so thank you for this. I'm also taking a class on anthropology of citizenship right now, so this is actually really perfect. And I wanted to actually ask you, because I think your kind of sort of, I guess, hypothesis also talks about sort of the presence of perhaps the white / the European / the sort of the Western nation state, right, that kind of tries to reject the outsider. But what we're also seeing in Europe specifically and in the US, where I live, is that actually black / brown / migrant communities who are long established are also trying to actually exclude the kind of new refugee, right? So we see that in the UK with Preeti Patel, who herself is technically an immigrant or comes from an immigrant like family background. And also in the Brexit vote, actually it was those populations that were actually coming from the outside that actually voted for Brexit, much more than the London cosmopolitan elite that also was very white actually. And also in Germany, right? Like there's a Turco-German kind of kind of thing. So how does that hypothesis fit? Because immigrants are also not a tabula rasa. They're actually coming from a Heimat as well, right? So how does that work for you?
Maybe one more question.
My name is Agnieszka Graf. I'm from Warsaw, and we're having a similar discussion, except the word is not Heimat, it's ojczyzna. So the question I want to ask actually complicates the question of about Palestinians. You mentioned Jews and Kurds. In other words, groups of people, I don't want to call them nations, it's complicated, without a home. Well, what about colonized or formerly colonized peoples? When people talk about ojczyzna in Poland, it doesn't have any of the coziness of Heimat in Germany, because we're talking about a lot of blood having been spilled in defense of our homeland, which means that now we deserve not to have all these immigrants coming in. So I wouldn't defend the right of formerly colonized or disempowered peoples to use that word either. It can be a very virulent nationalism, but it's a different kind of nationalism. None of the coziness, but a lot of the same aggression and I think justification of violence. So I wonder what you think of that. And whether, in other words, what I'm curious of, are we talking about Germany only? Or does this argument translate to other contexts?
Well, thank you. Maybe you just answer now and we have another round.
Let's just take more. I mean, we have been talking.
Are you okay?
So.
Hi, Mohua Shorkar. I'm from Binghamton University and also currently visiting fellow at Rework at Humboldt. I don't even know if this is a question, but I heard you saying that earlier that, and I totally agree, of course, how the idea of the man is so standardized, and that is of course, the basic unit from which everything is defined. And this is the citizen subject par excellence. But at the same time, however, two things. One was that there was some, I think there was a way in which you were talking about others being excluded from that, the subject of the nation, the subject of the Heimat, etc. I mean, but I thought that there were also people included in particular ways, not just those who are excluded, but those who are included in particular ways. And I was thinking also, because you were because the man part was so much highlighted, that are we not trotting over too quickly? Because are we not giving women too much of a carte blanche here? And I think some of the questions might even have brought that up even more clearly, that Heimat doesn't just belong to, it's not just the fantasy of men, but also women. And how do we deal with that as feminists?
I don't know. Is there still? Oh no, we have 5 minutes, so the floor is yours.
We have a whole day tomorrow, where there will be many answers and further questions exactly on these topics. And it's clearly right that it would be very. We don't want to preempt that, right? So, but just very briefly, maybe on the last question, I mean, the magazine Colonial Heimat was from the German Women's Association of the women's branch of the German Colonial Association, right? Who were, doing that. So clearly, this is a point that we will certainly discuss tomorrow in various panels. And I think, to cut also with your the several questions that about, well, what is this just a story about Germany, or let's say Europe in sense of protecting our European way of life? I would say it's a story on white supremacy that employs the notion of Heimat exactly to maintain this supremacy. And I think tomorrow in the first panel we will hear more about that also. So of course, these kind of dynamics of exclusion, oppression, of course they transgress. This is very much, running through various historical developments where we see that, people were, communities that were oppressed and excluded then became the oppressors. There are a lot of these examples, of course, right? So it is not a term, or it is not a call to create a one group that is, bereft of all of these dynamics of Heimat, and the other ones can just employ it, and the other one employed in those terms of in an exclusive manner, and the others don't. No, of course it's not like that. These kind of critical interrogations have to be done, as I said before, in every specific historical specificity, and have to be dealt further. The important point is here not to revitalize once again, right, this very ongoing tension, and I think it's a productive tension, right, that there is between, citizenship, state, nation, people, right, religion, right. I mean, it is this tension, right. I mean, this notion of inclusion and exclusion. Inclusion and exclusion is inherent to all of these concepts, and it is because of this tension that was in these terms and in these concepts, we have all these struggles that have actually led us to where we are today, right? In the one hand, we can say, well, we have now really very difficult times, and we rightly should say that, where the rise of this uninhibited racism and the rise of right-wing populism and reactionarism is, taking up again to such a ceiling. Yet it is exactly also the same time where never before so many people who were previously excluded from basic political rights are now part of it, right? So this notion of empowerment on the one hand, and this retraction, back to a safe zone of Heimat is a development of, is the same move of a particular political historical time that we're living at right now, right? And I think this is why the tension, right? There is no resolution to this tension by having another, yet another term that rescues us from that. We have to live with this tension, but it is important that we unfold and reveal the power dynamics that are in there, and to name them so that they can become actually that they don't remain unangreifbar, but in fact that we give it a name and that then we struggle and cope with them from whichever positions that we are in. I think this is the main thing that we hopefully will also focus in the next 2 days.
Okay, so maybe one last, is it a German concept to end with that, would you say?
I think I just wanted to say that the critique of the term Heimat that I said was clearly related to the German history of that, clearly, but I was trying to connect this with the current political developments in Europe at large, but of course, this is a story that connects, that highlights the role of Heimat and colonial politics, so in that way, it is a critique on that very much. And so, of course, it can be expanded and developed in different places differently.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We will expand and develop the debates tomorrow at the conference. You're all invited to join and have a happy night.